Forbidden Area. 23 hours after the destruction of the John Cabot, 6,537 light-years from Earth, 2175 AD. The 8 Republic spy drones flashed out of null space to recharge their capacitors for the next segment of the trip. The AI controllers all connected and initiated handshake protocols as they spread out from each other, opening their RAM scoops to collect the argonium needed to refuel their null space capacitors. One of the drones was designated as the early warning drone, already damaged from weapons fire, and determined to most likely fail to reach its destination. As the others collected argonium, it scanned the area, feeding as much power as it could to the onboard sensor suite to increase its scanning range. Determining that there were no threats within range in normal space, it flashed into null space and continued scanning. After a few minutes, the AI detected fluctuations that could only be created by large numbers of incoming ships. The semi-fluidic properties of null space create propagation waves in front of ships traveling through the unique medium, allowing for detection by specialized sensor suites such as the ones installed on the drones. It flashed back into space and warned the other drones that the propagation waves traveling through the null space medium indicated the imminent arrival of dozens of ships. The other drones responded immediately, closing their RAM scoops and priming their null space capacitors for an emergency flash-out. A few seconds later, over 100 Insectoid cruisers flashed in, sending out sensor pulses to try to determine the source of the 7 null space flashes that triggered the anomalous readings detected by the Insectoid sensor network. The drones had stealth capabilities, but the priming of the null space capacitors created emissions that escaped their stealth fields and allowed the Insectoids to determine their general positions. The early warning drone AI ran calculations and determined a course of action. It would sacrifice itself to increase the probability of the other drones successfully completing the mission. Dropping its stealth field, it pumped a tremendous amount of power through its sensor suite as it burned its engines at full power. Half of the cruisers detected the drone and swarmed towards it as they fired hundreds of particle beams. The other drones, almost finished priming their null drives, executed evasive maneuvers as the remaining cruisers targeted the sources of the leaking emissions and fired. The warning drone was destroyed, and the rest of the cruisers turned back to join the hunt for the others. A second drone was targeted and destroyed, and a third followed soon after. Hundreds of particle beams speared through the area every second as the surviving drones continued to evade them. Another was destroyed, and now there are only 4 drones left. One of them dropped its stealth field and pumped a massive amount of power into its transmitter, jamming the Insectoid scanners temporarily before it was tracked and destroyed by dozens of particle beams from cruisers further out. The remaining 3 drones finally finished priming their null space capacitors and had to drop their stealth fields before flashing out. Another drone was destroyed before making the transition, and the last 2 drones disappeared from the Insectoid scanners. The 2 surviving AI controllers communicated with each other and then separated, each taking a different route back to Republic space to increase the chances of one of them making it. They had only managed to collect 35% of the required argonium, and will have to drop out again soon to replenish their reserves. The neural pathways of both AIs suffered feedback as they recalculated their chances of successfully executing their mission. One calculated a 27% chance. The other calculated a 34.3% chance. As they continued along their separate courses, the 107 cruisers reorganized into 12 formations and flashed back into null space to pursue the 2 drones that had escaped. Insectoid Cruiser. 26 hours after the destruction of the John Cabot, the command drone dragged herself onto the raised dais of the command chamber, ignoring the pain signals emanating from 3 legs that had been severely damaged when the strange animals had destroyed their ship rather than become hostages. She concentrated on the display panels around her, seeing dozens of small animal constructs heading towards the cruiser, the scanners tracking their ominous approach. They meant to seek revenge for killing them, a concept she understood well as a command drone. She started releasing attack pheromones from her glands to incite the surviving drones as the air handlers spread the chemical blend throughout the ship. She was one of the specially bred command drones, and she had been in the Guardian fleet for almost 40 cycles since she emerged from her pupa. This ship was not from the enemy they had been watching for, but she was still following the directive of the Hive Mother when she attacked them. All animal ships were to be attacked. The only reason they tried to take the strange animal ship hostage was to determine who they were, analyze their technology, and send the information back to the Hive Mother. She looked at the flickering main display, seeing that the small animal constructs were almost upon them. She increased her concentration and sent out thoughts to the surviving drones on the ship. She could enter drone minds and see through their eyes, but she could not control them like true queens. She was able to influence their behavior and issue orders that they would follow by utilizing her thoughts and pheromones. Ignoring her pain, she put all her strength into her thoughts and projected them. Attack! Kill the animal invaders! She continually issued the thought commands, ensuring that the remaining drones would obey her. She heard multiple thuds reverberating throughout the ship as the animal constructs landed on the organic hull of the cruiser unscathed, the cruiser's weapons having been rendered inoperative by the massive core breach of the animal ship. She still had almost 500 worker drones on the ship, and she increased the potency of the attack pheromones she was releasing to stimulate more aggression from the normally docile drones. On a panel, she could see the largest cluster of animal landers in the middle of the ship, and she entered multiple drone mines until she found one in the area she wanted to see. Looking through the drone's eyes, she could see multiple sections down the long tunnel that had sparks shooting out of them as the animals were cutting through the hull. One after another, those sections of the hulls were cut through and pushed inward, falling to the floor with loud clangs that startled the waiting drones. The drones opened fire with their laser weapons, ionizing the atmosphere as they targeted the breaches with lower-powered beams to prevent them from causing hull breaches. No animals had come out yet, and she grew confused by their actions as she continued to look through the eyes of the drone. "Is this a deception?" she thought to herself as she continued to wait for the invaders to emerge. Over a dozen round things rolled out of the breaches and opened, turning into small four-legged machine animals that rapidly scurried from their locations as they clambered up the walls of the tunnel or charged at nearby drones. The strange things fired projectiles that hit the worker drones they targeted and tore them to pieces. They were incredibly fast, and some of them even went onto the ceiling, firing their weapons as they hung upside down. One of the four-legged things charged at the largest mass of drones in the tunnel, parts of it sizzling and melting as the drone laser weapons hit it. One of its legs was melted to slag, and it continued scurrying until it reached the drones and exploded, killing all of them and blowing out a huge section of the hull, exposing the tunnel to space. The command drone lost her view of the worker drone she was inhabiting as it was pulled out of the large breach along with all the others. She flitted about the ship in the drone mines, seeing the same events play out wherever the animal landers had attached themselves to the hull. She had a momentary flash of doubt, wondering if she had made a mistake in attacking the strange animal ship filled with machine animals. She entered a solitary drone that was trapped in a tunnel, and she saw more sparks as the interior wall was being cut from an adjoining space on the other side. She could sense the fear of the solitary worker drone, and she felt an overwhelming desire to save its life. She sent a thought to the drone's mind. "Hide." The drone responded, looking around and finding a small air vent with a grate that was just large enough to fit in. It removed the grate and entered it backwards before pulling the grate back. It was now facing the tunnel, and she waited to see what would come out of the breach. A few moments later, there was another loud sound as the section fell inward and slammed into the floor. She heard weapons and laser fire, and soon it stopped. She heard more animal sounds and sent another thought to the drone. "Silence. Be still." She saw an animal pass by, able to see it through the slits of the grate. This new animal was walking on two legs, with the other two legs holding a weapon. This animal was more like what she had expected. Others followed the first animal as they ran past her hiding spot, making noises at each other. They went beyond the ability of the drone to see, but she could still hear and sense them nearby with the drone's ears and antennae. She sent another thought to the drone before leaving its mind. "Stay here, do not move." She returned to her own body on the dais, momentarily disoriented by the transition. Looking at the displays, she could see that the animals had already taken over large portions of the cruiser. She could sense far fewer drone mines on the periphery of her consciousness. The animals were killing them faster than she could organize the defenses. There were sudden explosions outside the command chamber, and she felt panic rising inside of her. She pushed herself off the dais and crawled slowly to the engineering panel, trying her best to ignore the pain signals of her broken legs. She finally reached it and pulled herself up, leaning on the panel for support as she started tapping in the commands to overload the fusion reactors. The 6 drones in the command chamber rushed to the door, ready to fight to the death to protect her. There was a large explosion behind her, and she ignored it, fighting past the terror that threatened to cripple her. She started tapping in the last of the commands when her tarsal claw disappeared in a fine mist of exoskeleton and hemolymph. She was still staring in shock at what was left of her leg when she was slammed on the side of her thorax and knocked onto the floor. Skittering with her still functioning legs, she tried to right herself to fight back against her attacker. She managed to flip on her back, and she froze at what she saw standing over her. It was an animal with some type of flexible carapace, and she could see its face through the transparent material of the object covering its head. She looked into its eyes as it raised a weapon towards her head, grimacing and displaying its teeth. It had white eyeballs, and she focused on the small circles of color in the center of them. Despair flooded her thoughts. I have failed the Hive Mother. She found herself mesmerized by the animal's eyes as they looked into hers. They are green, she thought to herself, before the animal fired and put her out of her misery. 13 days later, Republic Hive World, TO. 700 days, 101.4 light-years from Earth. Bandit's comm node buzzed, causing him to take his finger off the rook he was just about to move, and he removed the node from his harness. He looked at the young queen on the other side of the chessboard and signed for her to wait. She responded yes, and picked up his white knight from among the many pieces she had already captured, holding it close to her compound eyes as she inspected it. He smiled at her as he got up from the seat and walked 2 meters away from the table before accepting the comm request. A holographic display appeared, and he placed the node on the floor as the display stabilized. A few seconds later, President Lopez appeared with a worried expression on her face. Bandit's neural pathways hummed, and he felt disconcerted by her expression and the unusual call. Something was seriously wrong, and he stopped himself from offering greetings as he stepped into the viewing range of the node. She saw him and started speaking immediately without the usual greetings she would give him. Bandit, we have a situation, and I need to speak with Aurora immediately. Please bring the node to her. This cannot wait. He detected the anxiety in her voice and responded, Madam President, she is in her rest period. I will bring the node to her right now. Please, stand by. She nodded curtly, and he picked the node up off the floor and reattached it to his harness before turning around to sign the young queen. Tilda, please come with me, my queen. We must wake your mother. Tilda. She put the knight back on the table and unfolded her 4 legs to stand. She walked over to him and put a tarsal claw into the hand he was holding out, clasping it gently. He felt a pleasurable surge at her touch, and his neural pathway efficiency increased as they radiated warmly. They left the chamber together, the queen keeping pace with him as they headed towards the Hive Mother's personal chambers. They arrived a few minutes later, and he knocked on the organic wall on the side of the entry to her chambers. He heard the 2 sentry combots inside activating before they emerged from the opening. One of them activated its scanners, sweeping him with a pale blue light from his head to the bottom of his feet, before stepping to the side to allow them entry. He did not get offended by the scan. They were merely performing their function. They entered the dim interior, and the queen pulled her claw from his hand and stared at the second, smaller chamber opening, pointing both of her antennas in the direction she was looking. A few seconds later, the Hive Mother emerged and walked over to them. She briefly touched claws with her daughter before turning to face Bandit. He saw that she had the new speaking devices already on her tarsal claws, and he smiled at her. She made claw movements, and he heard her thoughts emerge from the small device on her thorax. Bandit friend, my daughter says you have a need for me. He nodded in response as he signed to her, telling her that the president wished to speak with her. He took the comm node from his harness and placed it on the floor before reactivating it. The holo returned, and President Lopez appeared, looking impatient. The Hive Mother moved slightly to enter the viewing range of the node and started signing to the president, the words from the translator sounding out. "Hive Mother, it is agreeable to see you." The president smiled at the words she was hearing before responding. "And you as well, Aurora. I am sorry for interrupting your rest period." She was wearing the translator device on her chest, and holographic images appeared, translating her words into sign language. Aurora responded with impatient claw movements. "Yes, what do you need, Hive Mother?" President Lopez chuckled at Aurora's all-business manner before a harried look returned to her face as she started speaking. "Aurora, a drone returned to the Republic carrying terrible news. One of our ships was attacked by Hive ships and cruisers, and most of the crew was killed. Why are their ships over 7,000 light-years away?" As the device translated her words, the president activated her wrist comm and flicked a holo map into the air. The map showed a region of the galaxy that Bandit did not recognize, along with an outline of the course the drone took from there. Aurora saw the map and froze for almost a minute, not making any movement. Bandit stepped closer, worried about what was happening to her. The president's expression grew deeply concerned, and she looked at Bandit. The young queen walked over and lightly touched one of Aurora's tarsal claws. Aurora jerked and looked around quickly before staring at her daughter for a few moments. Finally, she resumed making claw movements. "Hive Mother, I ask your pardon. That is the forbidden area. For many cycles, we made ships and sent them there to protect us from the unknown animals if they returned. I am saddened that your ship has entered that area." "The forbidden area? How many ships are there in that region? Why are they there?" the president asked, her voice becoming more strident at what Aurora was revealing. 8 to the 5th power is their number. Maybe more, maybe less. That is the path we took when fleeing the Great Persecution," Aurora responded, quickly looking at Bandit as the device kept translating her thoughts. "Madam President, that is over 32,000 ships." Bandit clarified for President Lopez. Her mouth opened in shock at what she had just heard. "This is not good. How the hell are we supposed to rescue them?" she muttered, the holographic claws translating her words. Aurora responded, making claw movements faster than Bandit had ever seen her make them before. "The forbidden area is filled with our ships and will attack any animal ships they come across. The command drones in control of those ships were specially bred for the task. They are almost like queens themselves. Your ships will not be able to pass through them. There are too many to deceive." Aurora stopped signing and held up her 2 tarsal claws. After a few moments, she resumed making claw movements. "I would send my hive ship, but it is too slow." President Lopez furrowed her brows as she started pacing in a small circle. After almost a minute, she snapped her fingers and signaled to someone out of view. "Get me that data pad from the crazy engineer who was involved in dismantling the hive ship." Another half-minute passed before a hand came into view, passing her a data pad. She looked at it quickly before looking back at them. "Aurora, thank you for offering your hive ship. I am glad you did. You reminded me of this." She held up the pad and shook it. "One of the engineers who was involved in the project theorized that your null drives are slower because of an engineering fault in the construction of your system. He had designed a workaround to give you an advantage when it was time for you to launch your takeover of the hives. Unfortunately, he was prevented from testing out his theory because of security concerns by Fleet Command." She pressed on the pad a couple of times, and holographic schematics appeared, rotating as they displayed certain highlighted sections of the null drive. "Bandit, I am forwarding the schematics to your node now." A few seconds later, his comm node beeped, and he leaned down and pressed an icon on it. Another holographic display appeared, an enlarged version of what the president had on her pad. As it rotated, Aurora stepped closer and stared at it, with her daughter doing the same. They both stared at it for some time as they walked around the floating diagrams. They would periodically look at each other, and Bandit knew they were communicating with their thoughts. President Lopez was silent the whole time, watching them both intently as she waited for them to finish. After almost 5 minutes, Aurora finally turned back to face President Lopez and made claw movements. "Hive Mother, your builder is clever. I see it now. We copied the engine from the unknown animals when they attacked us, and we never made any changes except to increase our power generation abilities. I ask that you allow me to make these changes, and I will send my hive ship to save your workers." President Lopez smiled sadly before responding. "Aurora, I am so grateful for your offer, but the engineer estimated that it would take 18 days to make the modifications with a full engineering staff and construction bots. It would take at least 2 solar days for them to reach your hive." Aurora responded immediately after the holographic claw movements finished translating the president's words. "I will do it, Hive Mother. With my daughter, the command drones, and my workers, I can make the changes in 2 solar days if I start now." President Lopez heard her, and Bandit detected the disbelief in her facial expression at what Aurora said before managing to hide it. It was unnecessary to have done so. Aurora would not have known the meaning of the expression. "Aurora, thank you. The Republic will not forget this." She turned to look at Bandit. "Bandit, you are to do whatever is necessary to help her achieve the objective. The task force in orbit is at your disposal. I will send orders to them, and they will fulfill your every request without question. Bandit, I don't care if you must dismantle every goddamn ship in orbit to make this work. Do whatever you have to. Contact me as soon as the hive ship is ready." He was about to close the connection when he hesitated. There was a question he had to ask. "Query. The escape pods can keep them alive for 2 weeks. They only have less than 2 days left. Do you think they will still be alive by the time the rescue attempt reaches them?" President Lopez blew air out of her pursed lips as she considered his question. After a few moments, she asked her own question. "Why did you choose to stop the self-destruct protocol of your suit, Bandit?" Bandit thought about the question and answered. "Diego is my friend. The thought of him dying allowed me to exceed my original programming and achieve sentience because I did not wish for that to happen. When I achieved awareness, I could feel emotions for the first time. I saw the algorithm demanding I end my friend's life, and I killed it in anger. I instead chose to do what I knew was right." President Lopez nodded at his words. "You made an emotional decision. I am doing the same thing. Sometimes the calculus is not in favor of emotional decisions, and sometimes it does not matter. We do not leave our people behind, Bandit. They sent a plea for help and we will answer it. It does not matter if they are already dead when we arrive. They asked for help because they knew we would come. We will try to save them, and we will bring them back home to their families, one way or another." Bandit thought about what she had said for a few seconds before nodding. "I will do as you say, Madam President." "Good man. Keep in touch, Bandit." She tapped on her wrist pad and closed the channel. He picked the comm node up off the floor and headed out of the chamber, increasing his pace to catch up with Aurora and the Queen, who had already departed to start the modifications. K-2332 System. GFS. Glory of Dalknir. Protector-class battleship. 402 light-years from Earth. Year 123,005 BC. Dilson Rethvir targeted another Balrican heavy cruiser, aiming 6 starboard secondary particle beam turrets directly into the center of the large hull breach on the port side of the enemy cruiser. It heard the turrets whining over the din of the bridge as the selected weapons unleashed fury and penetrated deeply into the bowels of the stricken ship, cracking it in half. As the aft section disappeared in a blaze of nuclear fury from the core overload, it heard the Wansho Elder commanding the battleship howl in happiness at the sight of the aft section taking the bow portion with it. Ignoring the chills the howling of the Elder was sending down its spine, Rethvir scanned for another target within range of the battleship's weapons. There were none, and it turned to face the Elder to tell him, "Elder, there are no enemy ships within range of our weapons." The Elder turned his canid head and bored his wild eyes into the back of the navigator's skull. "Padlon Flath, dear, find us another ship to destroy and bring us to it." He growled loudly, causing the navigator to flinch before it hurriedly entered a series of commands on the panel in front of it. The battleship surged forward, heading for a mass of Balrican ships trying to gang up on two Magnati heavy cruisers 145,000 lieues away. The Elder raised his voice to be heard by the bridge crew. "You will seek out and destroy any enemy ship still functioning. Do not let me catch any of you failing to perform your duties again." As the Elder finished growling, Rethvir turned back around to face the panel, seeing that the rest of the bridge crew had suddenly found their own panels utterly fascinating. It smiled to itself at the sight of the recent Academy apprentices responding appropriately to the anger of the Wansho Elder. This was their first time engaging in battle, and it knew the Elder was taking it easy on them because of their inexperience. The Wansho were famous for their bloodlust when engaging in battle, and they were well known for not tolerating any failures or reluctance from warriors under their command. As the battleship continued to charge at the mass of Balrican ships, Rethvir readied the primary bow turret and waited for the enemy ships to come into range. A few moments later, the AI assistant confirmed a target lock, and Rethvir fired the bow turret. It looked at the scanning results. Though the range was long, 3 of the 4 particle beams hit the target directly amidships, the armored hull boiling as the invisible beams caused the molecular structure of the plating to enter a state of flux. Rethvir targeted the same location and fired again as soon as the particle beams had finished recharging. This time, all 4 beams hit as the battleship finally entered the optimal range. The 4 particle beams pierced through the now slagged armor and drilled through the interior of the ship before punching through the other side and striking the armor of one of the Magnati ships. The advanced composite armor of the Magnati heavy cruiser was barely damaged by the attenuated friendly fire, and Rethvir tensed, expecting the Wansho Elder to scold it for the accidental strike. As the targeted Balrican lost power and started drifting, the Elder howled again with glee and growled loudly in approval. "Dilson Rethvir, we'll make a Wansho out of you yet. Keep sending these Larishats to hell." Rethvir answered, keeping its eyes on the panel as it selected another target. "Thank you, honored Elder." Pride surged within it from the unexpected praise of the eminent Wansho warrior. It smiled as it fired a volley at another ship, shearing off the aft engines and crippling the vessel. The navigator turned the battleship slightly to port, and Rethvir targeted the now crippled ship with the starboard secondary turrets, tearing it apart as they glided past. Rethvir sent 2 aft anti-ship torpedoes towards it to finish off the job as the battleship bowled its way into the mass of Balrican ships ganging up the 2 Magnati warships. Ordering the AI assistant to multi-target with the secondary weapons, Rethvir aimed the primary bow turret at a badly damaged Balrican battleship that was being pummeled by the 2 Magnati heavy cruisers. All 4 beams entered a large hull breach that the Magnati had already caused, and the beams hit a critical system, causing massive secondary explosions that tore open the bow of the ship. Frozen fluids and bodies were expelled as the Magnati warships repositioned and started targeting the gaping wound of the Balrican battleship that was now splayed open like a blooming flower. The Glory turned hard to starboard to avoid the wreckage of a derelict Malit light cruiser, and Rethvir felt anger surging within it at the sight before looking at its panel for another ship to kill. For 5 solar months, they have been on the defensive as they tried to stem the tide of the Balrican onslaught and prevent further penetration into the Federation. 23 worlds had been scourged, and almost 87 billion Federation citizens had been murdered. 2 species were virtually exterminated after their home worlds and colonies had been glassed, with both species having less than 5 million survivors that were on other Federation worlds during the assaults. Another species, the Hunans, was eradicated entirely. They were advanced cetaceans, but they were planet-bound due to the unique synchronization of their brains to the peculiar magnetic field of their world. Leaving the planet would cause their higher brain functions to rapidly shut down, and they would lapse into a coma before eventually dying if they passed beyond the magnetosphere. As a result, none of the over 1 billion Hunans were able to leave their home world, despite the best efforts of Federation and Hunan scientists to replicate the unique field dynamics of their world. The hateful creatures, to ensure the extinction of the Hunans, changed their tactics to adapt to the unique problems of bombarding an ocean world. They flashed in and quickly destroyed the picket ships before jamming all signals to prevent distress calls from leaving the system. They did not utilize antimatter bombardment on the ocean planet, knowing that the cetaceans would be able to dive deep and escape the destruction. Instead, they towed a dozen massive asteroids from the belt and accelerated them to speeds of over 70 light-cals per solar second. The smallest one had a diameter of 300 light-cals, while the largest was over 600 light-cals in diameter. They were planet killers and exactly what the Balricans needed. They released the asteroids, slamming their deadly payloads of iron and rock into the oceans that covered the world. The energy of the impacts created cataclysmic tsunamis and caused the oceans to boil, initiating a runaway greenhouse effect that superheated the planet. Within 2 solar days, over 90% of the life on the planet was dead. In preparation, the Balricans split their fleet and launched a diversionary attack on another system in the sector to hide their true intentions of exterminating the Hunans and misdirect nearby Federation ships. As a result of the deception and jamming, the small Magnati fleet guarding the sector was out of position and could not get there in time to defend the system. When they finally arrived, there was only a single pod of a few hundred Hunian survivors still clinging to life within a trench deep under the ocean where they had sought refuge. Hydrophone probes were sent under the boiling waters to contact the last of the survivors, and their final words shattered the souls of the Magnati warriors in orbit. Remember us with love, our friends. We regret never being able to swim among the stars with you. Perhaps in the waters of the afterlife we will swim together. We will be waiting for you, and we will sing songs of joy when you finally enter the waters to join us. Promise us that you will forgive yourselves for being too late to save us. You have come, and that is all that matters to us. You are here to listen to our last song as we face the end. We feel your spirit swimming with us, and now we are no longer afraid. Bring the songs of our people to the waters of other worlds, our friends. Our songs are of us, and if our songs live on, then we are not truly gone. May the currents guide you well, our friends. We love you. The last of the Hunians then began to sing a mournful song lamenting the end of their people, and it echoed alone through the waters of their home world, finding no other Hunians to add to it and pass it on. Heard only by single-celled thermophiles and the hydrophones sent from orbit, their chorus dwindled rapidly as they succumbed to asphyxiation, using the last of their air to sing the final song of their people. The song became weaker as the Hunians continued to die, the ones still remaining trying to keep the song alive for just a little longer as they faced the coming end with courage and grace. There was one last call, and the final sorrowful howl faded away into nothingness as the last Hunan went silent and slowly sank to the bottom of the trench to join the rest of its pod. Their world, once alive with the sounds of billions of songs traveling through the waters, went silent for the first time in over 2 million years. The Hunans were no more, and the music of their world died with them. The Magnati warriors in orbit went into a rage and flashed back into null space to hunt down the Balrican fleet that had exterminated their cetacean friends. They ignored all attempts by Fleet Command to re-establish operational control over them, and they chased the Balrican fleet for over 500 light-years before they finally caught them. The 314 Magnati warships attacked the over 2,000-strong Balrican fleet without hesitation, and on that day the Balricans faced Magnati warriors consumed with grief and vengeance. After 21 hours of non-stop battle, the remaining 27 Magnati warships finally powered down their weapons. There were no more enemy ships left to destroy in the system. They claimed their vengeance, and now it was time for them to grieve. Fleet Command was angered by the disobedience and the waste of precious ships, but they wisely chose to drop the issue, and none of the Magnati commanders were brought up on charges. They feared a backlash from the Magnati and the Wansho if they pursued the matter, and even they had to admit to themselves that the greatly outnumbered Magnati fleet destroying the over 2,000-strong Balrican fleet was a major victory. After the Hunnian extermination, it seemed as if the whole Federation finally realized this was a fight to the death against an implacable adversary. Even the pacifist species were changed by the event, turning their industries entirely to war production. They would not fight and kill, but they now made weapons and built warships that would be used by those who had no such restrictions. After 5 months of brutal combat and billions of deaths, the Federation had finally blunted the Balrican advance and was now on the offensive to drive the demons out and kill them all. The Magnati and the Wansho were the only two species that had retained their martial abilities, and they were the only reason why the Federation had not yet fallen. The Malit were highly advanced and excellent builders of warships and weapons, but they lacked the intrinsic war-making capabilities of the Magnati and the Wansho. They were learning quickly, and the Federation had finally been able to convert all the economies and different societies of its membership to a war footing. Tens of thousands of naval apprentices were graduating every month. Thousands of warships were pouring out of the shipyards all over the Federation, and the great arsenal was finally ready to be unleashed. Magnati and Wansho elders were assigned to the ships of other species to train and lead them in the way of the warrior, like what was happening on the Glory right now. "Dilson Rethvir, why aren't you firing?" barked the Wansho elder, startling Rethvir out of its musings. It quickly looked at the panel and toggled the secondary weapons control, sending over a dozen particle beams out of both the port and starboard turrets that smashed into the Balrican ships that had slid next to the battleship to bracket it between them. "Pay attention, you fool," Rethvir thought to itself as it continued to scan the area around the Glory for more ships to target as the secondary turrets continued to chew up the flanking ships. Seeing anomalous readings, Rethvir squinted its eyes as it double-checked the scanner results. The Balricans were charging their null drives. Alarmed, Rethvir spun around to face the elder. "Elder, I am seeing signs of null drive activations." The elder snapped its head back to look at Rethvir before growling at the sensor officer to confirm the scanning results. It looked at its panel and then looked back up and signaled confirmation to the elder. Balrican ships started flashing out of the battle, and the elder howled in frustration at the cowards for fleeing. The Balricans had started this battle with 2,800 ships, and now there are less than 1,000 of them still combat-capable. They were fleeing, something they had never done before. As hundreds of Balrican ships flashed out, the bridge crew started banging their fists against their panels in the Malit version of applause, and the elder growled at them to cut it out. "Do you not see, young ones?" he barked as they looked at him in confusion. "They are learning, and now they will no longer fight to the death and allow us to wipe out their fleets. They will force us to hunt them and pin them down. This is not a victory, this is a disaster. Now we will be fighting an insurgency of genocidal maniacs." As the elder's words hit the apprentices, Rethvir saw them deflate, their earlier elation crushed by the brutal truth of the elder's words. Feeling bad for them, Rethvir turned its attention back to its panel, feeling disquieted by what the Wansho elder had said. "Ominion System Automated Border Outpost 1D25 on 1,893 light-years from Earth, 2175 AD. Ray woke up, gasping for air. This was the third time he had undergone the procedure, and he had gotten better at his reaction to the end of the sessions. Looking to his right, he could see the Mali waiting in the usual spot. Pulling the wires away from his forehead and temples, he sat himself up and swung his legs over the edge of the table before lightly pushing himself off to stand. He stayed there, waiting for the android to come with the usual glass of water. "You seem to be adapting to the procedure, my human child. This gladdens me." Ray nodded, acknowledging the statement from the Malit before emptying the glass of water and giving it back to the android. "I think so, Honored Elder. I am still emotionally affected by it, but I feel like I have a better handle on it. I agree with your assessment. Do you have any questions for me?" the Malit asked as the suit moved closer to the table, peering into Ray's eyes with the sensor lenses as they zoomed in. "I do, Honored Elder, but I must confess that I am extremely tired from the procedure. May I have your permission to rest for a while?" Ray answered, feeling like he could sleep for days. The Malit responded, "Of course, my human child. Sleep well. We shall speak when you have rested sufficiently." "Thank you, Honored Elder. I will depart now." Ray turned around and started to walk towards the entry door. He was halfway there when he turned around. Honored Elder, do you have any of the songs of the Hunans? I feel like I need to hear them. They will live while I listen to them sing. The Malit was silent for some time before answering him. Yes, I have them. The Malit flicked a suit finger towards Ray. I have transmitted their songs to your wrist pad. Ray bowed his head slightly. I am grateful. Thank you, Honored Elder. He turned around and exited the quarters, leaving the Malit alone once more. The door silently slid out of its recess and sealed the quarters. Hrethnir stood there for some time, thinking about what had been happening over the last few days. The human child had been surprisingly resilient and logical with the revelations, and Hrethnir thought it was a good sign for when the time came to involve all the sons and daughters of the Magnati in the coming struggle. Turning the suit towards a wall, Hrethnir flicked the suit finger again. A few moments later, an achingly beautiful song came over the hidden speakers. It was a love poem of the Hunans, one of Hreth-Nir's favorites. As Hreth-Nir continued to listen to the haunting refrain, it felt tears falling out of its eyes as the song of unrequited love brought it to the lifeless waters of their ocean world, where silence now reigns.